They say some hotel rooms remember their guests. Room 313 at the Grandview Hotel remembered them all. Every scream, every plea, even last breath. And tonight, it was hungry for one more. What you're about to hear happened 3 weeks ago. The hotel has been empty ever since. The police won't talk about it. But Sarah Chen's final recording tells us everything we need to know about why you should never check into room 313. Sarah Chen had always loved old hotels. The creaky floors, the old wallpaper, the stories hidden in every room. As a travel blogger, she'd stayed in hundreds of places, but old hotels were her favorite. That's why she was so excited when she found the Grandview Hotel online. Built in 1931, it was a beautiful old building right downtown. The photos showed fancy marble lobbies, big chandeliers, and rooms that looked like they belonged in an old movie. Best of all, she'd managed to book a room for half the normal price thanks to some kind of computer error. Sarah pulled her suitcase from the taxi and looked up at the Grandview Hotel. Even in the rain, it was beautiful. 12 stories of dark brick and gleaming windows, with ornate stonework that must have cost a fortune back in the day. The neon sign flickered slightly, Grandview Hotel, in elegant cursive letters that had probably welcomed thousands of guests over the decades. She hurried through the spinning door, her heels clicking on the marble floor of the lobby. Inside, the hotel was even more amazing. The ceiling was super high, painted with faded pictures of clouds and angels. A huge chandelier hung in the center, its crystals catching the warm light from old lamps. But something felt off. The lobby was almost empty. Just one old man reading a newspaper in a leather chair, and a woman behind the front desk who looked like she didn't want to be there. For a Friday night in a hotel this nice, Sarah expected more people. More activity. "Good evening," Sarah said as she approached the front desk. "I have a reservation." Sarah Chen. The desk clerk, a thin woman with gray hair, looked at her computer screen and frowned. She typed something, stopped, then typed again. "I'm sorry," the woman said, not looking up. "There seems to be some kind of error with your booking. What room number were you given?" Sarah pulled out her phone and checked her confirmation email. "Room 313. The clerk's fingers froze on the keyboard. She looked up at Sarah with wide eyes, then quickly looked away. That can't be right," the clerk said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Room 313 isn't, we don't." She trailed off and stared at her computer screen like it had just shown her something impossible. Sarah could see her reflection in the monitor. The booking was definitely there, complete with her name and credit card information. "Is there a problem?" Sarah asked. The clerk shook her head quickly, but Sarah noticed her hands were trembling slightly as she reached for a key card. "No problem at all," the woman said, but her voice sounded hollow. "Here's your key. 3rd floor. The elevators are just around the corner." As Sarah took the key card, the clerk's fingers briefly touched hers. They were ice cold. "Enjoy your stay," the clerk whispered, but her eyes said something completely different. They said, "I'm sorry." The elevator was one of those old-fashioned ones with brass buttons and a mirror on the back wall. Sarah pressed the button for the 3rd floor and watched the numbers light up as they climbed. 1st floor. 2nd floor. The elevator shuddered slightly as it reached the 3rd floor, and the doors opened with a sound like a sigh. The hallway went in both directions, dimly lit by wall lights that made dancing shadows on the old carpet. The walls were covered in dark wood that might have looked fancy once, but now seemed to soak up all the light. Sarah checked her key card again. Room 313 was to the right. She walked down the hallway, pulling her suitcase behind her. The wheels made soft bumping sounds on the worn carpet. Room 309. 311, and there it was. Room 313. The door was different from the others. While the rest had polished brass numbers, room 313's numbers were old and tarnished. The door itself was made of dark wood that looked almost black in the dim light. Sarah slid her key card into the reader. Nothing happened. She tried again, making sure the card was facing the right way. Still nothing. On the third try, the reader finally beeped and the lock clicked open. Sarah pushed open the door and reached for the light switch. The lights flickered on, revealing a room that took her breath away. It was beautiful. The ceiling was high, with fancy designs around the edges. A huge four-poster bed sat in the center, covered in deep red sheets that looked expensive and comfortable. Heavy curtains hung over tall windows, and in the corner sat an old armchair covered in dark green velvet. But there was something about that chair that made Sarah stop. It was sitting perfectly to face the door, like whoever sat in it would be watching everyone who came in. The fabric was worn smooth in places, like many people had sat there before her. "Beautiful," Sarah said out loud, her voice echoing slightly in the large room. She wheeled her suitcase inside and let the door close behind her. The click of the lock seemed unusually loud in the silence. Sarah walked to the window and pulled back the heavy curtains. The view was amazing. She could see the whole downtown area below, lights twinkling in the rain. She pulled out her phone to take a picture for her blog, but the screen showed no signal. That was strange. She'd had full bars in the lobby. She tried connecting to the hotel's Wi-Fi, but it asked for a password she didn't have. No problem, she'd get it from the front desk later. For now, she just wanted to enjoy the room. She'd never stayed anywhere this nice before. The bathroom had marble floors and a big old bathtub that looked like it could fit 2 people. The closet was huge, with built-in drawers and enough space for a month's worth of clothes. But as she explored, Sarah started to notice little things that didn't quite make sense. The air conditioning vent was covered with several layers of paint, like it hadn't been opened in years. The phone on the nightstand had a rotary dial, not the kind of vintage touch most hotels went for, but an actual working rotary phone from decades ago. And that chair. No matter where she stood in the room, it seemed to be watching her. The rotary phone suddenly rang, its old-fashioned bell cutting through the silence like a knife. Sarah jumped, her heart hammering. She walked over and picked up the heavy receiver. Hello. Silence. Not even the sound of breathing or a dial tone. Just complete, empty silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Hello, she said again. Is anyone there? Still nothing. Sarah hung up the phone, and immediately it rang again. She let it ring 5 times before picking up. Hello. This time, she thought she heard something. Not words, exactly, but a sound like wind blowing through empty rooms. Or maybe like someone whispering too quietly to understand. Sarah hung up and unplugged the phone from the wall. The silence that followed felt heavy, like the room was holding its breath. She shook her head and laughed at herself. Get it together, Sarah. It's just an old hotel. But as she turned back to her suitcase, she caught a glimpse of movement in her peripheral vision. The chair had shifted slightly, as if someone had just gotten up from it. The indentation in the seat cushion looked fresh, like it was still warm from a body that had been sitting there moments before. Sarah stared at the chair for a long moment, waiting for her logical mind to kick in. Old furniture moved sometimes. Temperature changes, settling foundations, humidity. There were dozens of explanations for why an antique chair might shift a few inches. But in her heart, she knew that wasn't what had happened. Something had been sitting in that chair, watching her unpack. And now it was somewhere else in the room. Sarah unpacked quickly, hanging her clothes in the closet and trying not to look at the chair. She brushed her teeth in the marble bathroom and changed into her pajamas, but sleep felt impossible. Every shadow seemed to move. Every creak of the old building settling made her freeze and listen. She grabbed her laptop and settled onto the bed, planning to work on her blog and maybe research the hotel's history. But the Wi-Fi still wasn't working, and her cell phone showed no signal at all now. It was like the room was cut off from the outside world. Finally, exhaustion won. Sarah turned off the lights and crawled under the covers. The bed was incredibly comfortable, probably the most expensive mattress she'd ever slept on. Within minutes, she felt herself drifting off. But just as she reached the edge of sleep, she heard something that made her eyes snap open. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps walking across the hardwood floor. They stopped right next to her bed. Sarah held her breath and listened. The footsteps continued around the bed, past the window, and stopped at the antique chair. Sarah woke up to sunlight streaming through the heavy curtains. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she remembered, the Grandview Hotel, room 313, and that strange feeling that someone had been sitting in the chair watching her all night. But in the bright morning light, it all seemed silly. Old hotels made weird noises. Her imagination had gotten the best of her, that's all. She stretched and looked around the room. Everything looked normal. The chair sat in its corner, empty and harmless. The phone was still unplugged where she'd left it. No sign of anything strange or scary. After a hot shower in the marble bathroom, Sarah felt much better. She got dressed and decided to explore the room properly. Maybe she'd find something interesting for her blog. The first thing she noticed was how clean everything was. Too clean, almost. Like the room had been scrubbed and polished until it shone. But when she looked closer, she saw strange details that didn't make sense. The windows, for example. They were spotless on the inside, but when Sarah tried to open them to let in some fresh air, they wouldn't budge. Not just stuck, they seemed to be painted shut, like someone had sealed them years ago and never bothered to fix them. The closet was huge and fancy, but all the hangers were the old wire kind that hotels stopped using decades ago. And they were all facing the same direction, lined up perfectly like soldiers in a row. Sarah opened the nightstand drawers. The first one was empty except for an old Bible with yellowed pages. The second drawer stuck when she tried to pull it out. When she finally got it open, it was completely empty, but it smelled weird. Like old flowers. Or perfume that had been sitting there for years. She walked over to the big mirror above the dresser and noticed something odd. The glass was old and wavy, the kind they used to make by hand. But in the reflection, room 313 looked different somehow. Darker. Like the mirror was showing her the room from a long time ago. Sarah shook her head and laughed. "You're being ridiculous," she said out loud. But her voice sounded flat in the room, like the walls were soaking up the sound. The phone rang. Sarah stared at it. She had unplugged it last night. She was sure of it. But there it was, plugged back into the wall, ringing with that old-fashioned bell sound that cut through the air like a knife. She walked over slowly and picked up the heavy receiver. "Hello." This time, there was definitely something on the other end. Not words, but sounds. Like someone moving around in a big empty space. Footsteps, maybe. And something else, a sound like fabric rustling. Like someone in a long dress walking across a room. "Who is this?" Sarah asked. The sound stopped. Complete silence for about 10 seconds. Then, so quiet she almost missed it, she heard breathing. Slow, careful breathing, like someone trying not to be heard. Sarah slammed the phone down and unplugged it again. This time, she wrapped the cord around the base and shoved the whole thing into the closet. Her heart was beating fast now. There had to be an explanation. Maybe the cleaning staff had plugged the phone back in when they came to clean the room. Maybe the hotel's phone system was old and glitchy. Maybe someone was playing a prank. But deep down, Sarah knew none of those things were true. She decided to get out of the room for a while. Maybe grab some breakfast downstairs and ask about the hotel's history. As a travel blogger, she was always interested in the stories behind the places she stayed. But when Sarah tried to leave, the door wouldn't open. She turned the handle and pushed, but nothing happened. She tried her key card in the reader, the light turned green, she heard the lock click, but the door still wouldn't budge. It was like something heavy was pressed against it from the outside. Sarah put her shoulder against the door and pushed hard. Nothing. She kicked it. Still nothing. "Hello?" she called out. "Is someone out there? I'm locked in." No answer. The hallway outside was completely quiet. Sarah tried the door handle again, and this time it opened easily. Like nothing had ever been wrong with it. She stepped into the hallway and looked around. Empty. No cleaning carts, no other guests, no sign that anyone had been near her door. The thick carpet showed no footprints except her own from the night before. Downstairs in the lobby, everything seemed normal. A few guests sat reading newspapers. The front desk clerk from last night was gone, replaced by a younger man who smiled when he saw Sarah. "Good morning, Miss Chen," he said. "How was your first night?" "Fine," Sarah said, not wanting to sound crazy. "I was wondering if you could tell me something about the hotel's history." "For my blog." The young man's smile got a little less bright. "What kind of history?" "Oh, you know. When it was built, famous guests, that sort of thing." "Has anything interesting ever happened here?" The clerk looked around the lobby, then leaned closer to Sarah. "You're in room 313, aren't you?" he whispered. Sarah nodded. "Look, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but that room has a reputation. Guests complain about weird noises, phones ringing in the middle of the night, doors that won't open. Management says it's just because the room is so old. But you don't think so?" The clerk shook his head. "I've worked here for 3 years. I've never seen anyone stay in that room for more than one night. They always check out early. Always. Why doesn't the hotel just fix whatever's wrong with it?" "They've tried. New carpet, new paint, new furniture. Nothing helps. Some of the cleaning ladies won't even go in there anymore." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Has anything bad ever happened in that room?" The young man looked around again, then pulled out his phone. "I'm not supposed to show you this," he said, "but maybe you should know." He opened a web browser and searched for something. After a few seconds, he turned the phone toward Sarah. It was a newspaper article from 1987. The headline read, "Businessman Found Dead in Hotel Room." Sarah read quickly. A man named Harold Vance had been found dead in room 313. No signs of violence, no clear cause of death. He'd been sitting in the room's antique chair, staring at the door. The article said he appeared to have died of a heart attack, but Harold had been perfectly healthy with no history of heart problems. "There's more," the clerk said, scrolling down. 3 months later, it happened again. Different guest, same room, same chair. Then again in 1992. And 1998. And 2003. Sarah counted in her head. That's 5 people. 6, actually. The last one was in 2010. After that, management decided to stop renting out the room. It's been empty for 13 years. Then how did I book it? The clerk shrugged. Computer glitch, probably. It happens sometimes with the old rooms. Sarah stared at the phone screen. 6 people had died in her room. All of them found sitting in that same green velvet chair, staring at the door like they were waiting for something. The same chair that had seemed to move on its own last night. The same chair she'd felt watching her while she tried to sleep. Sarah thanked the clerk and went back upstairs. She should pack up and leave right away. Find another hotel. Any other hotel. But as she stood outside room 313, key card in her hand, she hesitated. 6 people had died in there, but hundreds of others had probably stayed in the room over the years and been fine. The deaths were spread out over decades, probably just coincidences. And besides, she was a travel blogger. Weird stories were exactly what her readers loved. A supposedly haunted hotel room could make great content for her blog. Sarah slid the key card into the reader and pushed open the door. The room looked exactly the same as when she'd left it. Bed made, curtains drawn, everything in its place. Except for one thing. The chair had moved again. Not much, just a few inches. But it was definitely closer to the bed than it had been that morning. Like it had scooted forward while she was gone, trying to get a better view. Sarah walked over to the chair and examined it carefully. It was heavy, solid wood with thick velvet cushions. It would take real effort to move it, not something that could happen by accident. She grabbed the arms of the chair and tried to lift it. It was incredibly heavy, much heavier than it looked. No way this thing could move on its own. But as Sarah stood there holding the chair, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The seat cushion was warm. Not just warm, body temperature warm. Like someone had been sitting in it moments before. Sarah let go of the chair and backed away quickly. The room suddenly felt smaller, like the walls were moving closer together. The air felt thick and hard to breathe. She looked around the room with new eyes. 6 people had died here. 6 people had sat in that chair and never gotten up again. And now she was staying in the same room, sleeping in the same bed, surrounded by the same furniture. The phone in the closet started ringing. Sarah had unplugged it and hidden it away, but somehow it was ringing anyway. The sound was muffled by the closet door, but she could hear it clearly. Ring after ring after ring. She walked to the closet and opened the door. The phone sat where she'd left it, cord wrapped around its base, definitely not plugged into anything. But it kept ringing. Sarah picked up the receiver. "What do you want?" she whispered. This time, the answer was clear. A woman's voice, faint and far away, like it was coming from the bottom of a deep well. "Don't sit in the chair." The line went dead. Sarah stood frozen in the closet doorway, phone receiver still pressed to her ear. Someone, or something, had just warned her about the chair. The same chair where 6 people had died. The same chair that kept moving closer to her bed. She looked over at it again. In the afternoon light streaming through the windows, it looked perfectly normal. Just an old piece of furniture in a fancy hotel room. But Sarah knew better now. That chair was waiting for her. Just like it had waited for Harold Vance in 1987, and all the others who came after him. The question was, what would she do about it? Outside, storm clouds were gathering again. It was going to be another long night in room 313. By evening, the storm had gotten worse. Rain pounded against the sealed windows of room 313, and lightning lit up the sky every few minutes. Sarah sat on the bed with her laptop, trying to write about her experience so far. But every time she looked up from the screen, she saw that chair. It hadn't moved again since the afternoon, but she could swear it was watching her. Waiting. The voice on the phone had been clear, "Don't sit in the chair." But Sarah was starting to wonder if that was even her choice anymore. 6 people had died in this room, and all of them had been found in that exact spot. What if they hadn't wanted to sit there either? What if something had made them? Sarah tried to focus on her writing, but the laptop screen kept flickering. The hotel's Wi-Fi was still not working, so she couldn't upload anything or do research online. She was completely cut off from the outside world. Around 9 o'clock, she decided to take a hot bath and try to relax. The big old bathtub was one of the best parts of the room, and maybe the warm water would help her stop thinking about dead people and moving furniture. The bathroom felt safer somehow. It was bright and clean, with no antique furniture or mysterious phones. Just modern marble and shiny fixtures. Sarah filled the tub with hot water and slipped in, letting the heat wash away her fear. But even in the bathroom, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The mirror above the sink seemed to reflect more than just her face. Sometimes, in her peripheral vision, she thought she saw movement in the glass. Like someone standing behind her. But every time she turned to look, nothing was there. Sarah stayed in the tub for almost an hour, until the water started to get cold. When she finally got out and drained the tub, she noticed something weird. The water was draining slowly, like something was blocking the pipes. And as it went down, it made a strange sucking sound that echoed through the bathroom walls. She dried off and put on her pajamas, then opened the bathroom door to go back into the main room. The chair had moved again. This time, it wasn't just a few inches. The chair was now sitting right next to the bed, angled so that anyone sitting in it would be looking directly at where Sarah slept. It was close enough that she could reach out and touch it from the bed. Sarah's heart started beating fast. She had been in the bathroom for an hour. The door had been closed the whole time. No one could have come into the room and moved the chair. It was impossible. But there it was. Sarah walked around the chair carefully, looking for wheels or some way it could have moved on its own. But the chair sat directly on the floor, no wheels, no mechanism. Just solid wood and fabric that somehow had moved across the room while she was taking a bath. "This isn't happening," she said out loud. "Chairs don't move by themselves." But as soon as she said it, she heard a sound that made her freeze. The sound of someone sitting down in the chair. The cushions compressed slightly, like an invisible person had just settled into the seat. The old wood creaked under weight that wasn't there. Sarah could even see a slight indentation in the velvet where someone's body would be. She backed away slowly, not taking her eyes off the chair. Whatever was sitting there was invisible, but it was real. She could feel its presence like a cold spot in the room. Then she heard breathing. Not her own panicked gasps, but slow, calm breathing coming from the direction of the chair. In and out, steady and patient, like someone getting comfortable for a long wait. Sarah grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it at the chair. In the bright LED light, she could see the indentation in the cushion more clearly. The exact shape of a person sitting with their hands folded in their lap. "Who are you?" she whispered. "What do you want?" The breathing stopped. The indentation in the cushion slowly disappeared as whatever was sitting there stood up. Sarah tracked the movement with her phone's light, following the invisible presence as it moved around the room. Footsteps. Slow and deliberate, walking in a circle around the bed. Around Sarah. The floorboards creaked under invisible feet, marking each step. Sarah spun around, trying to follow the sound, but it was coming from all directions now. Multiple sets of footsteps, like several people were walking around the room. The creaking got louder and faster, until it sounded like a whole crowd was circling her bed. "Stop!" Sarah screamed. "Leave me alone." Instantly, everything went quiet. The footsteps stopped. The creaking stopped. Even the storm outside seemed to pause. Sarah stood in the middle of the room, phone light shaking in her hand, listening to the sudden silence. It was worse than the noise. At least when she could hear the footsteps, she knew where the danger was. Now it could be anywhere. Sarah looked at her phone. It was only 11:30 p.m. She had at least 8 more hours until sunrise. 8 more hours alone in this room with whatever was haunting it. She thought about leaving. Just packing her stuff and walking out right now. She could sleep in her car if she had to, or drive all night until she found another hotel. But something stopped her. It wasn't just curiosity anymore, or the thought of a good blog story. Something deeper was keeping her in room 313. Like an invisible hand on her shoulder, gently but firmly pushing her back toward the bed. The whispers started around midnight. At first, Sarah thought it was just the wind outside or the old building settling. But as she listened, she could make out voices. Multiple voices, all talking at the same time, too quiet to understand but loud enough to know they were there. They seemed to be coming from inside the walls themselves. Sarah pressed her ear against the wallpaper and could hear them more clearly. Men's voices, women's voices, all whispering urgently about something she couldn't quite catch. She moved around the room, listening at different spots on the wall. The voices were everywhere, in the walls, in the ceiling, maybe even under the floor. Like the room was full of people having conversations she wasn't invited to join. Gradually, Sarah started to make out individual words. Shouldn't have come here. Tried to warn them. The chair, always the chair. Can't leave, none of us can leave. Sarah backed away from the wall, her heart pounding. The voices were talking about the chair. About people who couldn't leave. About warnings that hadn't been heard. Were these the voices of the people who had died in room 313? Harold Vance and the others, trapped here somehow, trying to warn new guests about the danger. The phone started ringing again. Sarah looked toward the closet where she had hidden it. The door was closed, but she could hear the old-fashioned bell clearly. Ring after ring after ring, demanding to be answered. This time, she didn't hesitate. She marched to the closet and yanked open the door. The phone sat there, still unplugged, still wrapped in its own cord, but ringing loudly. Sarah grabbed the receiver. "What do you want?" she demanded. The voice that answered was different this time. A man's voice, scared and desperate. "Get out," he shouted. "Get out now. Before it's too late." "Who is this? What's happening to me?" "My name is Harold. Harold Vance. I died in this room 36 years ago, and I've been trying to warn people ever since. You have to leave, Sarah. You have to leave before sunrise." "Before sunrise? Why? What happens at sunrise?" But the voice was getting fainter, covered by static and interference. "The chair, it calls to you, makes you sit, can't fight it forever, have to leave while you still can." The line went dead. Sarah stood holding the phone receiver, her whole body shaking. Harold Vance. The first person to die in room 313. He was still here, still trying to save people from whatever had killed him. But what had he meant about sunrise? Why was that important? The old clock on the nightstand struck 3 a.m. Sarah realized she had been awake for hours, and the events of the night were starting to feel surreal. Maybe she was just tired. Maybe her imagination was getting the best of her. But as she looked around the room, she saw something that made her blood run cold. The chair had moved again. Now it was directly facing the bed, less than 3 feet away. Close enough that anyone sitting in it would be able to reach out and touch her while she slept. And this time, Sarah could see something else. In the dim light from her phone, she could make out the faint outline of a person sitting in the chair. Not solid, but visible enough to see the shape of shoulders, arms, a head tilted slightly to one side. The breathing was back, but now it was close. So close she could almost feel it on her face. Whatever was in the chair was leaning forward, watching her intently. Sarah tried to back away, but her legs wouldn't move. It was like her feet were glued to the floor. She could move her arms, turn her head, but her legs were completely frozen. The figure in the chair became clearer. It was a man in an old-fashioned suit, with thinning hair and glasses. His eyes were wide open and staring directly at her. "Harold?" Sarah whispered. The figure nodded slowly. "I've been sitting in this chair for 36 years, Harold's voice said, though his lips didn't move. "Waiting. Watching. Trying to warn people like you. Why can't you leave?" "The chair won't let me. It feeds on fear, on the moment when people realize they're going to die. It kept me here to help it find new victims. But I won't do it anymore. I won't let it take you too." Sarah felt the paralysis in her legs beginning to spread up to her waist. Soon she wouldn't be able to move at all. "How do I stop it?" "You have to leave before sunrise. That's when the chair's power is strongest. Once the sun comes up, it will call to you, and you won't be able to resist. You'll sit down, just like I did. Just like all the others." Sarah looked at her phone. 4:17 a.m. Less than 2 hours until sunrise. But I can't move my legs. Fight it, Harold said. Fight with everything you have. It's stronger at night, but you still have a chance. Don't let it win. Sarah focused all her energy on her frozen legs. She could barely feel them, like they belonged to someone else. But slowly, with enormous effort, she managed to take one small step backward. Then another. The figure of Harold Vance smiled sadly and began to fade away. Go, his voice whispered. Run. And don't look back. Sarah broke the paralysis and ran for the door. She grabbed her key card and purse, not bothering with anything else. The door handle turned easily this time, and she burst out into the hallway. The corridor was dark and empty, but it felt like freedom compared to room 313. Sarah ran to the elevator and jabbed the down button repeatedly. As she waited, she heard something that made her look back down the hallway. The door to room 313 was opening by itself. Slowly, like someone was pushing it from the inside. In the darkness beyond, Sarah could see the chair. It was glowing now, with a soft green light that pulsed like a heartbeat. And as she watched, it began to move. Not sliding across the floor like before, but floating. Drifting out of the room and into the hallway. Coming toward her. The elevator arrived just as the chair reached the hallway. Sarah jumped inside and hammered the lobby button. As the doors closed, she saw the chair floating just outside, its green glow filling the corridor. The elevator shuddered to a stop between floors. Sarah pressed all the buttons, but nothing happened. The lights flickered, and in the brief darkness between flickers, she saw something that made her scream. The chair was in the elevator with her. And it was no longer empty. Sarah woke up on the floor near the door, still in her pajamas. Her neck hurt from sleeping on the hard wood. In the bright morning light, room 313 looked normal again. But Sarah knew better now. She got dressed quickly and went down to the hotel's business center. Finally, she had internet access. Sarah searched for Grandview Hotel deaths. What she found made her sick. There weren't just 6 deaths in room 313. There had been dozens, going all the way back to 1931. A reporter named Mike Torres had been investigating the deaths in 2015, but he disappeared before he could publish his story. The last thing he wrote was that he planned to spend one night in room 313. Mike had discovered something important. Room 313 was built over an old elevator shaft where a construction worker named Thomas Brennan had died in 1931. Instead of moving the body, the hotel owner just sealed up the shaft and built the room on top of it. Thomas Brennan was still down there, and he was angry. According to Mike's research, Thomas was trapping the souls of everyone who died in that chair. Each death made him stronger. He was collecting energy, trying to get powerful enough to break free from the elevator shaft. Sarah printed everything and rushed back to room 313. When she opened the door, the chair had moved again. This time it was facing the door directly, and there was a piece of paper sitting on it. The note was written in old-fashioned handwriting. Miss Chen. You're smart, but knowledge won't save you. You can't leave this room alive. Sit in the chair and I'll make it quick. Fight me and you'll suffer. Either way, you'll join the others soon. TB. Thomas Brennan was talking to her directly now. Someone knocked on the door. Sarah opened it to find a woman in her 50s with tired eyes. I'm Linda Torres, the woman said. Mike was my brother. I heard you were asking questions about this room. Linda came inside and looked around with obvious fear. I can't believe you're staying here. Your brother was researching this place when he disappeared, wasn't he? Linda pulled a small notebook from her purse. He left this at my house before he came here. Said if anything happened, I should give it to someone who could finish what he started. Sarah opened the notebook. Mike had found something in the hotel's old construction records. There was an access panel in the basement that led directly to the sealed elevator shaft where Thomas's body was buried. Mike thought if he could reach Thomas's remains, he could help his spirit move on, Linda explained. Free all the trapped souls. Did he try? He checked in on October 15th. The next morning, his room was empty. Mike was gone, but all his things were still there. Sarah looked out the window. Another storm was coming. Soon it would be dark, and Thomas would try again to make her sit in that chair. But now she knew where to find him. Linda, I need you to do something, Sarah said. If I don't check out tomorrow morning, call the police. Tell them to search the basement for an access panel behind the boiler room. Linda grabbed her arm. Don't do this. Just leave. Right now. I can't leave. The room won't let me. As if to prove her point, the door suddenly slammed shut. The lock clicked loudly. Linda ran to it and tried the handle, but it wouldn't open. They were both trapped now. Sarah looked at Mike's notebook again. His final entry said Thomas didn't just want to trap souls, he wanted to escape. Every death gave him more power to break free from the shaft. If he got enough energy, he could leave the room and roam the entire hotel. Maybe even the whole city. How many people had died in room 313 over 90 years? How close was Thomas to escaping? The lights started flickering. Outside, the storm was getting stronger. Night was coming. The chair had moved again while they were talking. Now it was facing both women, like Thomas was deciding which one to take first. This time, he had two victims to choose from. And Sarah was running out of time to stop him. As darkness fell outside room 313, the temperature began to drop. Sarah and Linda huddled together on the bed, watching the chair in the corner. It hadn't moved for the past hour, but they could both feel something building in the room. Like the air before a tornado. Maybe we should try the door again, Linda whispered. Sarah shook her head. It won't open. Not until Thomas gets what he wants. The hotel around them seemed to groan and settle as night took hold. But the sounds weren't normal building noises. They were deliberate. Purposeful. Like something was moving through the walls. At exactly 9 o'clock, the real assault began. The cold hit them like a wave. Within seconds, the room went from comfortable to freezing. Sarah's breath came out in white puffs, and frost started forming on the windows. Jesus, Linda whispered, wrapping her arms around herself. How is it so cold? Before Sarah could answer, the chair started moving. Not sliding across the floor like before. This time it rose up into the air, floating 3 feet off the ground. It spun slowly in place, like it was showing off. Then it settled back down, but now it was facing the bed directly. He's stronger tonight, Sarah said through chattering teeth. Having 2 people here is giving him more energy to work with. The lights flickered and went out completely. In the darkness, they heard footsteps. Not just one person walking, several people, all moving around the room at once. The footsteps overlapped and echoed, like a crowd of invisible people pacing back and forth. Linda grabbed Sarah's arm. Who are they? The other victims, Sarah whispered. All the people who died in this room. Thomas keeps their souls here. A new sound joined the footsteps, voices. Faint at first, then getting louder. Men and women, young and old, all talking at once. Sarah recognized the woman who had warned her about the chair, but now there were dozens of others. Don't let him take you, one voice pleaded. Sit in the chair, another demanded. Just sit down and make it stop. Run while you can, a third voice urged. There's nowhere to run, came the reply. There's never anywhere to run. The voices got louder and more frantic. They were arguing with each other, some trying to save Sarah and Linda, others insisting they should give up. The sound was overwhelming, like standing in the middle of a crowded restaurant where everyone was shouting. Sarah covered her ears, but it didn't help. The voices were coming from inside the room itself. Then, cutting through all the other sounds, came a new voice. Deep and rough, with an accent from the 1930s. Enough. Thomas Brennan had spoken, and every other soul in the room fell silent immediately. Ladies, the voice continued, seeming to come from everywhere at once. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I've been patient with you, Miss Chen. More patient than I was with the others. But my patience has limits. The chair began to glow with a soft green light. Not electric light, something else entirely. Something that hurt to look at directly. You see, Thomas continued, I've been trapped in that shaft for 93 years. Do you know what that's like? Being crushed by concrete and steel, unable to move, unable to die properly. Listening to people walking around above you, living their lives while you rot in the dark. The temperature dropped even more. Sarah's teeth were chattering so hard she could barely speak. I didn't ask for this, Thomas said. I was just trying to make a living. Feed my family. But that greedy hotel owner cared more about his schedule than my life. So here I am, collecting the energy I need to finally break free. The floor beneath their feet started to shake. Not like an earthquake, more like something huge was trying to break through from below. Every soul I take makes me stronger, Thomas explained. And you two lovely ladies are going to put me over the top. Enough energy to tear through this concrete prison and walk the earth again. Linda was crying now, tears freezing on her cheeks before they could fall. Please, she whispered. Just let us go. We won't tell anyone. Thomas laughed, a sound like grinding metal. Oh, but you will tell people. You'll tell them all about the poor construction worker who died building their pretty hotel. You'll make me famous. And fame, my dear, is just another kind of power. The glowing chair began to slide across the room toward the bed. Slowly at first, then faster. Sarah and Linda scrambled backward, pressing themselves against the headboard. Choose, Thomas said. Which one of you sits first? Make it easy on yourselves. Neither, Sarah said, her voice shaking but determined. Neither of us is sitting in that chair. Oh, but you are, Thomas replied. You see, I've learned a lot about influence over the years. About making people want things they shouldn't want. Watch. Beautiful music began playing from nowhere. A gentle, peaceful melody that made Sarah feel drowsy and relaxed. The cold didn't seem so bad anymore. Her muscles loosened, and she felt herself leaning forward slightly. The chair looked so comfortable now. The green velvet seemed to shimmer and beckon. It would be so nice to just sit down and rest. She was tired. So very tired. Sarah found herself standing up, taking a step toward the chair. It felt like the right thing to do. Natural. Like she'd been planning to sit there all along. Sarah, no. Linda grabbed her arm, breaking the spell. Sarah snapped back to awareness, horrified to realize she'd been walking toward the chair without even thinking about it. He's in my head, she gasped. He can make me want to sit down. That's right, Thomas said, sounding pleased. And it gets stronger the longer you stay in this room. Soon you won't be able to resist at all. The old rotary phone in the closet started ringing, even though Sarah had hidden it away. The sound was impossibly loud, echoing off the walls like a fire alarm. Sarah looked at Linda. That's how he communicates with the outside world. Through the phones. Answer it, Thomas commanded. I have something to show you. Sarah didn't want to, but her feet carried her to the closet anyway. She opened the door and picked up the heavy receiver. Hello. This time, instead of voices, she heard sounds. The noise of construction from long ago. Hammering, men shouting, machinery running. And underneath it all, a man screaming for help. The sound stopped with a horrible crash, the sound of a man falling down a dark shaft and hitting the bottom hard. Then silence. "That was my death," Thomas said through the phone. October 12, 1931, 3:47 in the afternoon. "I fell 12 floors into that elevator shaft. Took me 6 hours to die down there in the dark. No one came to help. No one even looked for me until the next morning." Sarah hung up the phone, but Thomas kept talking. His voice now came from the chair itself. "They poured concrete over me like I was garbage. Built their fancy hotel right on top of my grave. For 90 years, I've been planning my revenge." The shaking got worse. Cracks appeared in the walls, and dust fell from the ceiling. Thomas was trying to break out of his underground prison right now, using the energy from the fear and despair in the room. "But I need just a little more power," he continued. "One more soul should do it. Maybe two, to be safe." The chair began moving again, this time sliding all the way up to the foot of the bed. Sarah and Linda had nowhere left to retreat. "Last chance," Thomas said. "Sit willingly, and I'll make it quick. Keep fighting, and I'll drag this out for hours. Your choice." Sarah looked at Mike Torres' notebook, still lying open on the bed. His final entry mentioned the access panel in the basement. If she could somehow get down there, find Thomas's remains. But that was impossible. They were trapped in this room, and Thomas was getting stronger by the minute. "I have a different idea," Sarah said suddenly. "Oh. You want revenge against the hotel owner who buried you, right? Against the people who built this place and forgot about you?" "Yes." "Then you're thinking too small," Sarah said, her mind racing. "One hotel. One city. Why stop there? With enough power, you could have revenge against everyone who ever ignored a worker's death. Everyone who ever chose profit over people's lives." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Go on. Let us go," Sarah continued. "Let us tell your story to the world. We're writers, communicators. We can make you more famous than you ever dreamed. More powerful than just trapping souls in one room." Thomas laughed again. "Nice try, Miss Chen. But I've heard promises before. I prefer the certainty of trapped souls to the uncertainty of human nature." The chair moved even closer. Close enough that Sarah could reach out and touch it. "Besides," Thomas added, "after 90 years of waiting, I'm not a very patient man anymore. I want my freedom now. And you're going to give it to me." The chair compressed slightly, like an invisible person had just settled into it. But this time, Sarah realized with growing horror, Thomas wasn't sitting in the chair. He was preparing it for her. The smell of old concrete and decay filled the room. Thomas Brennan was rising from his underground grave, ready to claim the souls that would finally set him free. And there was nowhere left to run. The smell of old concrete and death filled room 313. Sarah could feel Thomas Brennan's presence growing stronger, like a shadow spreading across the room. The chair sat empty but ready, waiting for its next victim. "Sarah," Linda whispered, "we have to do something." Sarah was flipping through Mike Torres' notebook, looking for anything they might have missed. There had to be another way. Some detail that could save them. Then she found it. A loose page stuck between the back cover and the last entry. Mike's handwriting was rushed, like he'd been writing in a hurry. "Important, Thomas isn't trapped by the concrete. He's trapped by guilt. Construction records show he had a family, wife and 2 young children. He was working double shifts to pay for his son's medicine. The boy was sick. Thomas died trying to provide for them. His guilt over leaving them behind is what keeps him here, not just his anger." Sarah read the note again. This changed everything. "Linda, look at this," Sarah said, showing her the page. "Mike figured out why Thomas can't move on. It's not just revenge he wants, it's forgiveness. He feels guilty about dying and leaving his family with nothing. How does that help us?" Before Sarah could answer, Thomas's voice filled the room again. But this time he sounded different. Less angry, more tired. "Reading my secrets, are you?" he said. "Mr. Torres found that information the night he died. Thought it would help him somehow." "Tell me about your family, Thomas," Sarah said suddenly. The temperature in the room dropped even more. "Don't. Your wife's name was Margaret, wasn't it? And you had 2 children. A boy and a girl. Stop talking. You were working extra shifts because your son was sick. You needed money for his medicine." The entire room began to shake. Pictures fell off the walls, and the windows rattled in their frames. Thomas was getting angry, but Sarah pressed on. "You weren't just some random construction worker who died in an accident. You were a father trying to save his child's life." "Silence!" Thomas roared. The shaking stopped suddenly. The room went completely quiet except for Sarah's and Linda's heavy breathing. "You don't know what you're talking about," Thomas said quietly. "You don't know what it's like to fail your family. To die when they need you most." "But you didn't fail them," Sarah said. "Did you ever find out what happened to them after you died?" Long silence. "Then, no. Mike did," Sarah said, looking at the notebook again. "He researched your family too. Your son survived, Thomas. Margaret used the money from your life insurance to pay for his treatment. He grew up to become a doctor himself. He saved thousands of people's lives." There was a sound like someone falling to their knees, though they couldn't see anyone. "That's not true," Thomas whispered. "Your daughter became a teacher. She had 4 children of her own. Your grandchildren, Thomas. They all lived full, happy lives because of the sacrifice you made." "You're lying." Sarah found another page in Mike's notes. Margaret kept working at the fabric shop downtown. She never remarried, but she always told people she was still married to the best man who ever lived. She died in 1987, probably around the same time as your first victim in this room. The sound of a grown man crying filled the room. Deep, painful sobs that had been held back for 90 years. She really said that?" Thomas asked through his tears. "According to everyone Mike interviewed, she talked about you every day until she died. How proud she was of you. How you gave your life trying to take care of your family." The chair in the corner began to change. The sickly green glow faded away, and it looked like normal furniture again. Just an old chair covered in worn velvet. "But if they're all dead now," Thomas said slowly, "then I can see them again. I can apologize for leaving them." "Yes," Sarah said. "But not if you're carrying the weight of all these trapped souls. Not if you've become a killer yourself." "The others. Harold, Mike, all of them. I kept them here because I was lonely. Because I was afraid to move on alone. They want to move on too, Thomas. Listen to them." The voices of Thomas's victims began to speak again, but this time they sounded different. Calm. Peaceful. "It's okay, Thomas," one voice said. "We forgive you." "We understand," said another. "You were in pain." "Let us go," whispered a third. "Let us all go home." One by one, the voices faded away. Not disappearing, moving on. Sarah could feel them leaving the room, finally free after years of being trapped. "There's something else, Thomas," Sarah said gently. "Mike's research found Margaret's grave. She's buried in Rosewood Cemetery, just 10 minutes from here. Your son and daughter are buried right next to her. They saved plots for you, even though they never found your body." Sarah could feel Thomas's presence moving across the room. Not threatening now, just tired. Ready to rest. They kept a place for me. They never stopped loving you, Thomas. And they're waiting for you now. The door to room 313 suddenly swung open. Cool, fresh air flowed in from the hallway, replacing the smell of death and concrete. The lights came back on, bright and normal. "I can leave?" Thomas asked, wonder in his voice. "You could always leave," Sarah said. "You just had to forgive yourself first." But then Thomas's voice changed again, becoming harder. "Wait. If I leave, if I join my family, what happens to you? You know my secret now. You could expose the hotel, cost them money." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with supernatural cold. Thomas was right. Even if he moved on, she and Linda knew the truth about room 313. The hotel would want to keep them quiet. "That's not your problem anymore, Thomas," she said quickly. "You need to go to your family." "But it is my problem," Thomas said firmly. "You helped free me when you could have just saved yourselves. You showed me the truth about my family. I owe you a debt." "What kind of debt?" Linda asked nervously. "The kind where I make sure you both get out of this hotel alive," Thomas said. "And I make sure no one else ever gets trapped in this room again." The walls of room 313 began to crack. Not from Thomas trying to break out this time, but from him tearing down the barriers that had kept him prisoner. "The hotel covered up my death for 90 years, Thomas said. Time to return the favor. Time to bring this whole place down." Sarah grabbed Linda's hand. "Thomas, wait. You don't have to destroy anything. You can just move on." "I will move on," Thomas said. "But first, I'm going to make sure room 313 never traps another soul. And I'm going to make sure the truth comes out about what they did to me." The floor beneath their feet began to split apart. Down below, Sarah could see into the old elevator shaft where Thomas's body had been buried for so many decades. "Go," Thomas said. "Get out of the hotel. Tell everyone what really happened here. Tell them about the construction worker who died building their fancy rooms. Make sure they remember my name." Sarah and Linda ran for the door as the room began to collapse around them. Behind them, they heard Thomas Brennan's voice one last time. "Thank you," he said. "For helping me remember that I wasn't a failure. I was just a father who loved his family." As they reached the stairway, Sarah looked back once. Through the dust and debris, she could see a faint figure standing in the ruins of room 313. A man in work clothes, holding his hat in his hands. He tipped his hat to her, smiled, and faded away. Thomas Brennan was finally going home. Sarah and Linda ran down the hotel's main stairway as the building groaned and shook around them. Other guests were fleeing too, confused and terrified by the sudden structural collapse. No one understood what was really happening, that a 90-year-old wrong was finally being made right. "What's going on?" a man in a bathrobe shouted as he passed them on the stairs. "Is it an earthquake?" Sarah didn't answer. How could she explain that the hotel was being torn apart by the spirit of a construction worker who had died building it? They reached the lobby just as a chunk of ceiling crashed down where they had been standing seconds before. The beautiful crystal chandelier swayed dangerously overhead, its crystals chiming like wind chimes in a storm. "We need to get outside," Linda gasped, pulling Sarah toward the front doors. But the hotel manager was there, blocking their way. The same nervous woman who had checked Sarah in 2 nights ago. Her eyes were wild with panic. "You can't leave," the manager said. "Not yet. You know what happened up there, don't you? You know about room 313. Get out of our way," Sarah said firmly. "The hotel's lawyers are on their way," the manager continued desperately. "We can make a deal. Money, lots of money, if you just sign some papers saying this was a gas leak or something. Anything but the truth." Sarah looked at the woman with disgust. Even now, with the building collapsing around them, the hotel was more worried about lawsuits than people's lives. "Thomas Brennan," Sarah said loudly, so everyone in the lobby could hear. "That's the name you've been trying to hide for 90 years. He died building this hotel, and you buried him like garbage. The other hotel guests stopped running and stared. Some had their phones out, recording everything. A construction worker named Thomas Brennan fell down an elevator shaft in 1931, Sarah continued, her voice carrying across the lobby. Instead of recovering his body, the hotel owner sealed the shaft and built room 313 over his grave. His spirit has been trapped there ever since, killing guests who stayed in that room. The manager's face went white. You can't prove any of that. The floor beneath them cracked, and through the gaps, Sarah could see into the old basement. There, outlined in the rubble, were the remains of the original elevator shaft. And scattered among the concrete and steel were human bones, what was left of Thomas Brennan. There's your proof, Linda said, pointing down through the crack. Several guests were filming now, capturing everything. The hotel's cover-up was over. The truth about Thomas Brennan would be all over social media within minutes. The building shook again, harder this time. But this wasn't destruction, it was liberation. Sarah could feel Thomas's presence one last time, not angry anymore, just satisfied. Tell them, his voice whispered, so faint only Sarah could hear it. Tell them I was a good man who just wanted to take care of his family. And then he was gone. Really gone this time, not trapped or hiding. Thomas Brennan had finally found peace. The hotel manager made one last desperate attempt to block the doors, but the other guests pushed past her. Everyone wanted out of the building before it collapsed completely. Sarah and Linda stumbled out onto the street just as the fire department arrived. Behind them, the Grandview Hotel groaned and settled, but it didn't fall completely. The building would survive, but room 313 was gone forever, buried under tons of rubble. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" a paramedic asked, approaching them with a medical kit. "We're okay," Sarah said. "But you need to know what happened here." She told the paramedic about Thomas Brennan, about the elevator shaft, about the bones visible through the cracked floor. Within an hour, the police had cordoned off the building and called in the coroner's office. "This is going to be a huge story," Linda said as they sat in the back of an ambulance, wrapped in blankets. Sarah nodded. Thomas wanted people to remember his name. Now they will. A police detective approached them with a notebook. "Ladies, I need to get your full statement about what happened up there." Sarah took a deep breath and began to tell the whole story. About the chair that moved by itself. About the voices of trapped souls. About a construction worker who died trying to provide for his sick child and spent 90 years trapped between worlds. The detective wrote it all down, even the parts that seemed impossible to believe. 3 hours later, Sarah and Linda were finally free to leave. The hotel had been evacuated and sealed off while investigators examined the remains in the basement. "What are you going to do now?" Linda asked as they stood outside the police barricade. "Write the story," Sarah said simply. "The real story. About Thomas Brennan and his family. About the hotel that covered up his death. About the guests who died because no one wanted to admit the truth." Linda smiled sadly. Mike would have liked that. He always said the dead deserved to have their stories told. Sarah looked back at the Grandview Hotel one last time. Most of it was still standing, but the third floor was partially collapsed. Room 313 was gone, nothing but a pile of rubble and broken memories. "Goodbye, Thomas," she whispered. As they walked away, Sarah thought she heard something in the wind. It might have been her imagination, but it sounded like a man's voice saying, "Thank you." By morning, the story was everywhere. Hotel cover-up exposed, workers' remains found after 90 years. The video footage from the lobby had gone viral, and news crews were camped outside the Grandview Hotel. Sarah's blog post about her experience in room 313 crashed her website from too much traffic. Publishers were already calling, wanting to buy the rights to the full story. But the most important call came from an unexpected source. "Miss Chen. This is Dr. Robert Brennan. I'm calling about your story, about my grandfather Thomas." Sarah's heart skipped. Your grandfather. Thomas Brennan was my great-grandfather, actually. My family has been looking for his grave for decades. We never knew what happened to him after he died. Thank you for finally bringing him home. 2 weeks later, Thomas Brennan was buried in Rosewood Cemetery next to his wife Margaret and their children. 3 generations of his family attended the funeral, finally able to say goodbye properly. Sarah stood at the back of the crowd, watching as Thomas's great-great-grandchildren laid flowers on his grave. He had been right to be proud. His sacrifice had created a legacy of doctors, teachers, and good people who made the world better. The Grandview Hotel never reopened. It was torn down 6 months later, and a memorial park was built in its place. At the center stands a simple plaque. In memory of Thomas Brennan, 1898 to 1931, and all the workers who built this city. Their sacrifices are not forgotten. Sarah visits the memorial sometimes, especially when she's working on difficult stories. She sits on the bench facing the plaque and remembers the night she helped free a man who had been trapped by his own guilt for 90 years. Room 313 is gone forever. But Thomas Brennan's story lives on, a reminder that every life has value, and every death deserves to be remembered. The last guest of room 313 had finally checked out. And Thomas Brennan was home.